5,000 tons of steel on a hill, stuck, wheels screaming, engineers out of options. Then, with a flick of a hidden latch under the cab, a surge of power from a secret engine buried below jolts the entire train back to life. For decades, American railroads relied on this invisible Franklin booster to conquer the one thing steam engines could not beat alone: the brutal force needed to get moving from a dead stop. But why did railroads toss this life-saving invention onto the scrap heap, erasing it almost overnight? To answer that, you need to know just how impossible moving a stopped train really was. 5,000 tons of steel, and every ounce is glued to the rails by a force you cannot see: static friction. At a dead stop, every bearing, every journal box, every patch of steel on steel is locked up tight. The main wheels are not just fighting gravity or the weight of the train, they are battling a kind of invisible glue, static friction at the contact patch and in every axle. On paper, it takes 3 to 5 times more pull to get those wheels turning than to keep them rolling once they are moving. In the real world, with cold weather, stiff grease, and a heavy grade under you, that gap can spike even higher. A rolling train wants to keep moving. That is rolling friction, low and predictable. But when a train is stopped, static friction fights back with everything it has. It takes a surge of force to break loose thousands of tons from rest. For each ton of freight, rolling resistance at a crawl might be 4 or 5 pounds. But to start moving, you are looking at 12, 15, sometimes more. Multiply that by a mile-long string of loaded cars, and the numbers get ugly fast. The locomotive cylinders are rated for thousands of horsepower, but at 0 miles per hour, they are at their weakest. The pistons can push hard, but without speed, there is no momentum to help. Worse, the drive rods can hit what railroaders call dead center, where the pistons line up just wrong, and the whole machine stalls until gravity, or a bit of luck, gets it past the hump. That is why so many steam trains needed a shove from a helper engine just to get out of the yard. It was not about the hill ahead. It was about beating inertia at the very first inch. Every time a heavy freight stalled on a grade, crews and dispatchers paid the price. A helper engine meant another crew, more coal, more water, and 20 minutes lost coupling and testing brakes. All this just to move a train past the first 100 feet. That is the inertia trap, where every pound of steel is an anchor, and the main engine is already at its limit before the journey even begins. A stalled freight on a grade didn't just mean sweat in the cab, it meant a headache for the whole railroad. When the main locomotive couldn't budge the load, the dispatcher reached for the worst tool in his kit, the helper engine. That meant calling another crew out of the bunkhouse, firing up a second boiler, and burning through more coal and water just to move a train a few miles. By the 1930s, every helper job tacked on roughly $2 extra an hour in wages for the engineer and fireman alone. Add in the cost of coal, sometimes a ton or 2 per shove, and thousands of gallons of water, and the bill grew with every trip up the hill. But the real pain wasn't just in the payroll or the fuel room. Every time a helper was needed, the whole operation slowed to a crawl. The train had to stop at the bottom of the grade, wait for the pusher to back down, couple up, and run a full brake test. Only then could the double-headed consist grind up the hill. At the summit, the process reversed. Stop again, cut off the helper, test the brakes, and wait while the pusher drifted back to its home base. On a good day, this routine cost 15 or 20 minutes per train. On a busy line, with helpers running back and forth all day, those delays stacked up fast, eating into schedules, tying up mainline tracks, and leaving crews idle in the siding. For the bean counters upstairs, the numbers were ugly. Every helper move meant more wages, more coal, more water, and more lost time. Multiply that by dozens of trains a day, and the railroad's operating costs ballooned. That's why any device that could squeeze a few extra pounds of pull from the main locomotive without stopping for a helper looked like a miracle. The promise of an onboard solution, something hidden under the cab that could turn deadweight into raw, tractive effort, was enough to make even the most skeptical superintendent pay attention. In the early 1920s, a small company out of Philadelphia set its sights on a problem that had haunted every major railroad, getting a heavy train moving without the delays and costs of a helper engine. That company was Franklin Railway Supply. Their engineers studied the dead weight riding on the trailing trucks, the so-called lazy wheels under the cab that carried thousands of pounds but never helped with the actual pulling. Franklin's pitch was simple. Why not make those wheels earn their keep? The answer took shape in a series of patents. US 1 to 602 124 and 1,503,475 filed during the decade when railroads were desperate for any edge they could find. Franklin's design was not just a sketch on paper. By 1923, they were marketing a compact, two-cylinder steam engine that could be bolted right onto the trailing truck. It was a tight package, a gear case, a pair of pistons, and a clutch mechanism, all squeezed between the heat of the firebox above and the filth of the ballast below. The company promised railroads a revolution: eliminate the helper engine, save time, save payroll, and keep the main line open. Their ads claimed that this little engine could turn dead weight into an extra 15,000 pounds of pulling power at the rail, enough to start a stalled freight where before you would need a whole second locomotive. Franklin's brochures and trade journal spreads from the mid-1920s leaned hard on numbers. They promised fuel savings, faster schedules, and the ability to move longer trains over the same track. The booster, they said, was the missing piece that made every pound of locomotive count. The pitch worked. By the end of the decade, Franklin boosters were being installed on new engines from coast to coast, especially on lines facing steep grades or heavy coal drags. For railroad superintendents and accountants, it looked like a way to squeeze more profit from every run. But the real test did not happen in the boardroom or the patent office. It happened in the roundhouse. That is where the foreman, grizzled, tired, and up to his elbows in grease, got his first look at Franklin's secret engine. For the men who kept the locomotives running, it was one more machine to maintain, one more set of leaks to chase, one more reason to crawl under a hot firebox in the middle of the night. The promise was big, but the work was gritty. And that is where the story of the booster shifted from glossy ads to hard reality. The only spot on a steam locomotive where you could hide an extra engine was the trailing truck, right beneath the cab. Those wheels were not meant to drive the train. They just carried the firebox and kept the locomotive's back end from sagging. But Franklin's engineers saw potential in all that dead weight. With up to 40,000 pounds pressing down, those wheels clung to the rails while doing little more than rolling along. If you could harness that adhesive weight, you would have a secret weapon for traction, especially when the main drivers started to slip. Instead of mounting the booster up front or on the main drivers, they tucked it low between the rails, bolted to a cast steel bed plate on the trailing truck. It was a brutal environment. Above, the firebox blasted out heat. Below, every mile meant a barrage of cinders, grit, and mud. The booster had to endure it all, with steam pipes that flexed as the truck twisted over rough track. Franklin's brochures showed tidy diagrams, a compact box of gears and pistons shielded by thick castings. In reality, the unit was a magnet for oil, water, and every pebble the ballast could throw. Mechanics called it a grease pit. The gear case sat just inches from the ties, filled with oil to keep the reduction gears alive. It was sealed until the seals wore down, letting dirt mix with the oil and turn into a gritty paste that could grind steel to shreds in months. The booster worked like a car starter motor. Pull a latch in the cab, and a gear inside the booster slid over, biting into the axle. Suddenly, those trailing wheels kicked in, shoving the train forward with a burst of torque. But it could not stay engaged for long. Built for brute force at low speed, the booster was hidden and rugged, and that placement made all the difference if you could keep it running in the filth. A Franklin booster sat sealed in a cast iron box under the cab, but the magic always started in the cab itself. The engineer's hand would reach down, sometimes almost to the floor, and pull a small latch or close a stubby valve. That simple motion sent a jolt of compressed air racing down a pipe to a cylinder mounted right on the booster gear case. Inside, a heavy yoke shoved a steel idler gear sideways out of its resting place and straight into the teeth of the bull gear on the trailing axle. It was a move straight out of a car's starter motor, one gear sliding into mesh with another, designed to bite in only when the speeds matched just right. If the wheels were at a dead stop or barely crawling, the teeth would slide together with a satisfying thunk. Instantly, the booster's own steam valves snapped open, admitting live steam from the main boiler into two small cylinders inside the housing. With the valves open, the booster's pistons fired in quick succession, turning a crankshaft buried in oil. That shaft spun the idler gear, which was now locked to the trailing axle. The result was a burst of torque, raw low-speed power, delivered straight to the rail through wheels that usually did nothing but roll. For the engineer, there was no drama on the gauges, just a new sound, a rapid chug-chug-chug from beneath the cab, completely different from the deep exhaust of the main cylinders. The whole locomotive would shudder as the trailing truck suddenly became a drive wheel, helping to break the train loose from the grip of static friction. The beauty of the system was its simplicity. No complicated linkages, no waiting for another engine to couple on. The booster was there, ready to go, hidden but always on call. And just like a car's starter, it was meant for short bursts. Engage it at low speed, get the train moving, and then cut it out before the gears spun too fast. When the job was done, the same air cylinder would pull the idler gear back out of mesh, letting the trailing truck return to its usual lazy ride. For a few moments, dead weight became muscle, all with a flick of a lever and a rush of steam. A Franklin booster wasn't just a clever gadget, it was a brute force solution tucked under the cab, waiting for its moment. On paper, the numbers looked almost too good to be true. At the touch of a lever, the booster delivered an extra 15,000 pounds of tractive effort right to the rails. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference between a train frozen on a grade and a train clawing its way uphill. In raw muscle, the booster's two small cylinders could throw down 300 to 400 horsepower, but only at a crawl, and only for as long as you kept it in the fight. There was a catch. The booster was built for a single job, to break the train loose from a dead stop or to keep it moving when the big drivers started to slip. It was never meant to run all day. Most engineers leaned on it for a couple of minutes, just long enough to get the tonnage rolling or to grind through the worst of a short grade. Use it for longer and the steam bill would come due in a hurry. The boiler could only feed so many hungry cylinders at once, and the booster had a reputation as a steam hog. Use it too long, and you would watch the main pressure gauge start to sag, leaving you with a tired fireman and a locomotive running out of breath. But the real line you never crossed was speed. The booster's gearing was set for walking pace. As soon as the train crept past 15 miles per hour, and certainly by 20 miles per hour, the little engine had to be out of the game. If you forgot and let it wind up with the booster still engaged, the loads on those gears shot through the roof. Some boosters had a centrifugal governor, an automatic cutout that would snap the gear out of mesh as the axle spun up. Not all of them did, and not every governor worked as advertised. More than one roundhouse got a call about a booster that had been left in too long. Stripped teeth, cracked housings, sometimes a pile of parts where a perfectly good idler gear used to be. As a foreman, I always told my crews, treat that booster like a car starter. Get moving, then get off it fast. If you rode it past the danger line, you would be sweeping up the pieces. Down in the pit, the glamour of extra horsepower vanished fast. The booster gear case sat just inches above the ballast, soaking up every bit of grit, cinders, and winter slush the rails could throw. Oil seals never stood a chance. By the end of a week, the gear bath was half oil and half grinding paste, enough to turn brand new teeth into scrap metal before the next inspection. Flexible steam joints, designed to twist and sway with the truck, became chronic leak points. Hot steam hissed out in the dark, slicking everything with a film of grease and turning the workspace into a skating rink. Every time the engine rolled in, there would be a new puddle under the firebox and a fresh trail of oil down the frame. The booster did not just leak, it bled. Keeping the thing running meant crawling under a hot firebox, wrenching at seized bolts, and fishing out failed gaskets with numb fingers. Mechanics cursed every minute spent under there, especially when a job that should have taken an hour turned into an all-night slog. The steam hog reputation was well earned. Use the booster too long and you would watch the main boiler pressure sag, leaving the firemen scrambling to keep up. The roundhouse foreman summed it up best. Engineers loved them because they saved their hide on the hills. We hated them because we had to crawl in the mud to fix them. Electric traction motors changed everything. The first generation of diesel-electric locomotives from EMD and Alco came out of the gate with a trait steam could never match: full torque at 0 speed. Unlike a steam engine, which struggled to break inertia, a diesel's traction motors delivered their maximum pull the instant the throttle was cracked. There was no need for a clever clutch, no hidden steam lines, no oil bath grinding away under the cab. The torque curve on an EMD F unit was flat from a dead stop right up to the point where adhesion gave out. No booster could compete with that. Railroad mechanical bulletins from the late 1940s and early 1950s started to spell it out. As steam locomotives rolled in for overhaul, shops were told to strip out anything that was more trouble than it was worth. Boosters were first on the list. Some were simply disconnected, steam lines blanked off, gears left idle. Others were yanked completely, leaving empty castings or just the trailing truck as a silent reminder. The logic was simple. With diesels handling all the heavy starts, nobody wanted to waste hours fixing a device that had outlived its purpose. By the time steam was on its last legs, you could walk through the roundhouse and spot the change. Where there had been a secret engine under the cab, now there was just a hollow shell, one more piece of the steam era left behind by progress. Steam's old solutions vanish, but the challenge remains. Every leap in efficiency comes with invisible trade-offs. Today's locomotives have no need for hidden boosters, but engineers still wrestle with the limits of physics and the cost of complexity. Progress buries its secrets, but nothing truly disappears. It just waits for a new problem to bring it back into the light. What's the next hidden fix we'll forget?